out there is only an interpretation. It's an inner interpretation, what we're seeing out in the world. And so we have the control, we have the power to shift that interpretation, to shift our energy in our body, to shift our emotional state at any time in any situation. But we're trained that we have to make these circumstances out there change so then I could be happy, or I could feel safe, or then I could feel empowered. But we really have to start on the inside. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Soul Sessions.
That's right.
I'm here with Dr. Rob Maldonado. I'm Deborah Burnt Maldonado, and we are with Creative Mind, bringing you the best of psychology, neuroscience, Eastern spirituality, and coaching. So,
yes. And today we're talking about neuroscience with an emphasis on the emotional brain.
And continuing our series on this great minds of psychology, almost wrapping up the series with neuroscience. But before we begin today's episode, I would love for you to subscribe to our channel. If you're watching us on YouTube, just click the button here in the corner. Or if you are listening to us on one of our podcast services, not ours, but Apple, Spotify, all those great services, don't forget to subscribe so you can hear every episode of this amazing series and more. So let's talk about the brain today. We talked a lot about the different minds of psychology, you know, the psyche, the mind, the unconscious. Now we're getting into the hardware and the software of the brain.
Yeah. I wanted to dedicate this podcast to all the people, past and present, who have had brain injuries and head traumas and neurological disorders, because this kind of hits home in all of us. I know every family knows someone or has someone who has been touched by brain disorders, brain diseases. So this is our contribution to their welfare, hopefully, and you know, we hope they feel better, get better, and there's always hope. There's always hope because of neuroplasticity. So, there's a couple of really interesting people associated with this topic. One of them is from the very beginning, Paul Broca. Now, he goes back to mid-1800s. So
I didn't realize it went back so. I thought neuroscience is very new.
Yeah. So Paul Broca was in France, and a physician. He was interested in anthropology. At that time, neuroscience didn't exist, so he wasn't considered a neuroscientist. Yeah. But he was a researcher and a clinician, very interested in the human condition. And he came up with this idea, and we still use his name today because he named one of the primary language centers on the left side of the brain. Most of us have it on the left side of the brain, some people on the right, is this center called Broca's area. So if you want to make a name for yourself and you want to be remembered, name
part of the body.
Name a discovery after you, because you know that keeps you in the books. Anyway, Paul Broca, he was the one that really started to see that when there was head injuries on the left side of the brain, especially in the frontal parts of the brain, people would lose language. Right? And people at that time probably, you know, a horse would knock them over in the street. They'd fall off a carriage or something.
So the kids that have trouble with language, like children who are diagnosed with autism or on the spectrum, would they have that part of the brain? Is that affecting that part of the brain, the language center?
Yes, you betcha. Because
you betcha.
The theory, and this is an interesting part of neurodevelopment, that the language is one of the most recent acquisitions of our brain. Right? If you look at evolution in the long term, the big picture.
They were grunting and using sign language.
Well, we used
draw pictures.
You know, like chimps, they use body language, facial expression to communicate. Some howling and grunting, but language is a very recent phenomena. So the theory is that when there is brain damage, let's say the kid has to experience a difficult C-section or has a difficult birth process, that some of these centers are, because they are the most recent, the brain kind of tries to protect all the other areas first.
Because they're more related to physical survival. Like it's kind of like survive physically first. They have a lower priority.
Oh, that's a good way to put it. Lower priority because they're more recent. They're still evolving, and they're sensitive. They're delicate. They get damaged very easily. So yes, kids who have language problems and have a history of difficult birth, you can kind of make the connection there. But people that suffer head injuries now, like in motorcycle accidents, car accidents,
Playing football,
concussions, on and on. Often they lose language because they damage these centers, or the center called Broca's area that selects language. When I'm speaking right now, my Broca's area is working really hard. Yeah, it's firing away. If you do an MRI, an fMRI, a functional magnetic resonance image, you see that area light up.
So is this similar to that woman who did the TED Talk about having a stroke, and she said she couldn't speak, and it kind of messed with her language center as
Absolutely, yes. So there's 3 ways it gets damaged. A trauma from the outside, an internal bleed, which is called a stroke, that damages that particular part of the brain. And then neurodegenerative disorders like Alzheimer's and Parkinson's and those areas.
So when people have strokes, I remember my grandparents both had a stroke, and one of my grandmas, she lost her speech. She couldn't speak, and that not only just her physical one side, but that speech was impaired. So that, interesting. Okay, and so he came up with this area, and how did he come up with it? Just a patient that he had?
Well, yeah. So in research, right, you start with one case. So he noticed, okay, this individual had a head injury on his left side. He lost language. He lost the ability maybe to move his right side or something like that. And then he noticed, oh, there's a pattern here. I'm starting to notice that a lot of my patients that lose language seem to have this
in this area, left side, this area
injury, head injury. And sure enough, then he started to dissect the brains after they passed away, do autopsies. And he noticed, this particular region of the brain is damaged, and therefore he concluded that this must be a language center.
And then he went on to develop the other parts, or did someone else do that?
Yeah, other people contributed. There was a guy named Wernicke who later then identified another part of the brain further back in the brain that decodes language. So as you're listening to this podcast, there's a part of your brain, a module, that is dedicated to deciphering, decoding the sound that it's hearing.
Well, it's like we talked about in perception. This kind of maybe a little off the trail, but your eardrums are vibrating. Like the sound isn't really coming out of the phone or the computer you're listening to. It's like there's just like kind of a vibration, and then your ear is like eardrums and are processing, feeding information to the brain, and then you hear, like it interprets and basically hears what we're hearing.
Yeah, very similar.
It's what the sound is interpreted through the brain.
Yeah, so if you imagine a little drum, the eardrum, right, is vibrating based on the molecules, the air molecules hitting it. It's vibrating to that pattern. Then those little patterns code in a electrical chemical signal that travels into the brain to that particular area.
So we're really like inside. You're hearing us inside your mind versus it's coming out through in a way, the vibration's coming in, but the interpretation and the actual experience of our voices are coming through your brain.
Absolutely. Yes. This is the miracle and the interesting part of studying the brain, that we start to see, oh my God, this is like a computer, like a supercomputer that's been given to each and every one of us. But no instructions. But if we're lucky, right? Education, we can think of some instruction on how to learn the language and stuff, but it's not really an instruction on how does the brain work and how do you use it. So anyway, Paul Broca, we can say one of the founding fathers of the discipline. He died in 1880, so you can get a sense of most of his work was. At that time, Freud, I think, was just being born, right around that time, or a young kid.
And then he was talking about sex,
Freud and Jung,
the sexual drive. Yeah.
Yeah, it carried it into the new millennia, but the turn of the century. Sorry, and then more recently, and this is someone who really inspired many students when I was in school back in the old days. His name is Oliver Sacks. Most of you have probably seen or heard of this movie called Awakenings, or a book
Robert
called
De Niro.
And Robin Williams.
Yeah.
So Robin Williams plays Oliver Sacks when he was doing his internship at, I think he was in Queens Hospital in New York. Really interesting movie. We'll post a link so if you want to see it, because it's an actual...
Came out in 1990, so a while ago.
Yeah. It's an actual kind of account of his experience in neurology and neuropsychology. So he when he was doing his internship there, or residency, he noticed they had a lot of patients that had a particular disorder where they had fallen early on in their youth into a coma, and they were unreachable. Essentially, they were in a vegetative state.
They were kind of locked inside their bodies, and you couldn't really...
Yeah.
Catatonic, is that what they called it, or not really?
Yeah, I think it's one of the terms they use, but essentially they were comatose or in a coma, which means they're not able to communicate, and we're not sure if they're in there thinking, experiencing anything.
But their eyes could be open, and they're kind of like just kind of like sitting.
There are different degrees and different levels of it. So anyway, Oliver Sacks was interested in what the new pharmaceuticals that were coming out at that time might be able to help these people. So he started experimenting with L-Dopa, which is a precursor to dopamine. And dopamine is the one that helps us move and coordinate our movements. Sure enough, they started to respond. And a lot of them came out of the comas. Now, some of them had been in comas for 20, 30 years. So when they saw themselves in the mirror, of course,
they got old.
There was this
like, wait a
old
minute.
person when, the last thing they remember was being young.
So they didn't have any like memory of this when they were in the comatose state. There was no like...
Yeah, because you're not experiencing anything.
Yeah.
I mean, you might be experiencing internal sensations.
But your memory isn't working to remember. Okay.
That's right.
Kind of like a deep sleep.
Yeah, it's like when you go to sleep and then you wake up in the morning, right? You kind of pick up where you left off.
Yeah.
So for them, it was a long sleep of 20 years.
With Rip Van Winkle, yeah.
That's right.
And so, that was interesting. But then they didn't stay, like it was...
It didn't work for long. For a brief period of time, these people were out and about, and they were taking field trips and going to movies and all this stuff.
And their families came, right, and reconnected with them. And
yes, their families were overjoyed, of course. But
I think it was like they had to keep upping the dose or something, and then
that's it.
It got really dangerous where they would harm them if they...
Well, dopamine, and this is still applicable today. It also has, like, if you push it to the other extreme, if there's too much, you start to have psychotic symptoms.
Oh, that's what it was.
So they started to have uncontrollable psychotic symptoms,
which isn't
paranoia,
good.
Hallucinations, aggressive behavior. So they went back slowly into their comatose state. Very dramatic, true account of something incredible. So Oliver Sacks, he also wrote a famous book called The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat.
I remember that book.
Yeah.
So let's move on to the structure of the brain. So we have all these centers. How, like, when one part's damaged, you kind of lose that ability. But there's different parts of the brain that affect a person. So
so let's begin with the external. It's called the neocortex. Neo simply meaning new. So it's the latest part to develop, like we were saying with language, right? And an interesting side effect of Broca's work, right, was that people started to think, okay, then the brain must be modular. That certain components, certain parts, pieces, and particular areas are specialized and specialize in certain kinds of functioning. And there is something to that. But then when you really examine it, the brain is still interconnected, right? It needs information from other parts to do those functions. So it's both. It's modular, but it's also holistic. And we see that function always when, another aspect that kind of evolved from Broca's work was this idea that when something is damaged by nature or by accident, it's an opportunity for us to understand what those areas were doing.
And isn't that why you got into the neuroscience and working with kids with developmental disorders? Because it was so fascinating. You were interested in the brain.
Part of it,
kind of like your friend who was in a coma. You had that kind of fascinated talking to the neurologist about the brain. And
yes. My personal experience was I was working my way through school, working in a hospital I was in the respiratory department. So part of my job was to help people stay on these ventilators, right? These life support systems. And one of my friends who was working with us there had a motorcycle accident at that time. And he came in through the emergency room. And sure enough, he had a brain injury. And half of his body was paralyzed. And when we took him to get the CT scans and the MRIs, big part of his, I think it was the right side of his brain was damaged. So he had some language and some understanding, but he wasn't able to move a lot. So I got very interested in the brain and what it was doing. And at that time, I went to the university, part of the University of Texas, and interviewed one of the professors there who was a neuropsychologist. And we had a conversation about the brain, and he told me, look, if you're interested in the brain, we're starting a new program in neuropsychology, a master's program. Why don't you come and apply? And I said, I don't have any psychology background at that time. I had a degree in art, but was finishing up and all that. But he said, all you have to do is get a few courses under your belt, and we'll let you into the program. So
that's where it all started.
That's where I started my career in psychology. But it's what was striking to me was how brain damage changes the individual. Your personality changes. Obviously your physical, your ability to move your body, depending on where the injury is, changes.
Well, they just had that movie out, that documentary, well, probably a year or so ago. Alex Hernandez, and he was a football player, and then he became very violent, and he was like accused of murder, and they were like, what happened to him? Family, like abuse and all this stuff, and they were attributing it to multiple concussions that basically altered his personality. Yeah. And so the brain does a lot for us, and we want to take care of it.
Yes, absolutely. You want to take care of your brain.
Wear a helmet when you're biking. Yeah. So let's go back to the structure. So this Broca really started this conversation of that there's certain special areas of the brain.
Specializing, these areas specialize in particular functions. And sure enough, as the science evolved, and now we have these incredible fMRIs, which is functional MRIs that can look at the brain in real time. In other words, you put a person in the tube, and you give them something to think about or to do, and you look at what parts of the brain light up, what parts are being activated. So yes, some of the general areas that are important, and some of you may have heard some of the stuff already. The occipital lobe, which is the back part of the brain, is actually connected to your eyes.
Which is weird, right?
Yes. So what's in front, your eyes, actually all the signals through the optic nerve have to travel way to the back of the brain to get processed and to create this experience of color and form that we see. So the occipital lobe is that part of the back of the brain. The temporal lobe associated with memory and with hearing. So when you hear, the sides. The frontal lobes, then you have thinking, executive functioning, also
like the ability to focus too, right? That's
Yes.
like where if you don't have it, there's creative people are more like on this kind of peripheral thinking, and then more logical people tend to have more activity in the front of the brain.
Yeah.
But you want to balance. You don't want to just be all creative or all focused. You want to have a balance.
Yeah, and then it's split in half, of course. So when you look at the half of the left side of the brain, you see these brain centers for language, like Broca's area and Wernicke's areas. On the right, though, the right side of the brain is the artistic, intuitive, kind of more
Is it emotional or?
emotional. Yeah, you can say that, because these language centers, right, are so specialized that they help us think. And if you look at how we are educated, we're educated through language, verbal skills, mathematical skills, also on the left side.
Like reading, we're not really taught to use our imagination to learn. We're used to like kind of logic to learn.
That's right.
Which sometimes drains out all of you creatives out there. I feel like it drained out all sucked your creative energy out being in a public school system, or even university.
Yes.
Not cultivating that creativity in your younger life.
Yeah, and then if you look at IQ testing, some of you might have been tested in school or other institutions. It's primarily broken down into verbal intelligence and visual spatial. So they say that it's cultural neutral. That it's that anyone tested essentially will get an accurate score, but there's some debate about that. Right? There was a psychologist in Australia who decided to put this to the test. So he tested these Aboriginal children who are in nature most of the time and didn't go to school and didn't do very well on the verbal IQ.
But they were brilliant as far as like intuitive and...
Yeah, so he set up this board and just put natural stones and branches and seeds and things like that, and had them just look at it briefly and then try to put them back the way they were placed. Sure enough, they did really well, whereas the kids in the typical school were not so good at it.
Wow, that is interesting.
So that we see intelligence is adaptive. In other words, it's meant to help you fit into your environment. That's a big function of the brain, is to help you fit into your environment.
And then if you're not cultivating those parts of your brain growing up, if your creativity wasn't cultivated, or if your left brain wasn't cultivated as far as like books and reading and language, it can affect your, just kind of those centers. You need a little work to rebuild them or build them up.
That's right. So now let's look at the inside of the brain. So the neocortex, right, is this outer covering, very specialized in helping us do all this function. As we go in, these are older structures because evolution kind of evolved from the inside out. So the core, the center of the brain, of course, is the brain stem, which includes the pons and the brain stem. And the brain stem essentially is the brain going into all our body. So essentially, we're a walking brain.
Yeah,
because
it doesn't just start here.
Yeah, it's not just housed in our skull. It has this spinal cord, right, that runs all the way down our spine.
The whole nervous system.
And then it sends out these nerves that go to the very tips of your feet and your hands and your face and everything. So essentially, you're a living, walking brain.
So when they say your body mind, it's really that brain, like every part of your body is listening and feeling and processing through the brain, the central nervous system, and then going out to the peripheral nervous system. And so that brainstem is really just one thing, is survive, right? It's really more about keeping the body breathing, keeping the body in homeostasis, digesting food, those kind of things.
Yeah, when we fall asleep, there's certain centers in the brainstem. They're called nuclei. So these are specialized neurons that send out signals to the brain that say start dreaming. So it floods the brain with these impulses, and you start to have dreams during the night without waking up, which is a trick that is hard to carry out, right? Because think about it, your brain is actually more active during REM sleep than right now. So it's more awake actually when you're dreaming than right now, but it doesn't wake you up. In other words, most of the time you don't wake up from while you're dreaming. So it has to do this delicate balance. So anyway, so the brainstem, we can think of it as this functional survival, respiration, digestion, sleep patterns, all this stuff. But in between then the neocortex and that primitive, sometimes it's called the reptilian brain. I never liked that, but that's kind of
the ancient brain.
Yeah,
right?
It's more like a fish brain essentially. Yeah. In between the neocortex and this brainstem is this limbic system, which is the emotional brain. Yeah, sometimes called the mammalian brain, meaning most mammals have this. That's why there's wolves, whales, dogs.
Yeah, that's why our dogs, like our cats, our pets have that. We have that emotional bond with them because they have the same limbic system.
That's right. They bond with each other. They take care of their young. They're very nurturing. They have great memories. Elephants, those kind of things. So all this work, it's still evolving. I mean, we're still learning more about what this limbic system does, because from Broca's time onwards, most of the study was kind of seen through the lens of cognition, right? We were interested in thought, in thinking, in reason, and of course we need to understand those things. But this deeper part of the brain and the way it interacts with the neocortex is really
well. If you think about the education system, we don't learn about emotions in school. No one teaches us about emotions. Maybe like biology, we're talking a little, maybe we know about this like little piece of the brain, but everything we're learning is very cognitive, very like memorize, logic. And then we go to work and we're hired based on our resume, which is a very logical way to hire someone. Let me hire this person. They have the skills. It's a logical thing versus, is this person going to fit in with the group? How's the team going to work together? Like, well, that's one of the things we are always conscious of when we're hiring for our team is like more the emotional part. Like, do they feel like they fit in with our group, and will they be easy to work with and kind of resonate with everyone and have that heart? Because you can have a great person with a great resume who's a bull in the china shop with other people, and they don't have that emotional intelligence. So I think that maybe now they're taking those tests, like the Big Five, for hiring, but it seems that we're just starting to think about emotions. And I, like you said, that there really is little research on emotions. There's very little research. I mean, there's some definitely, but compared to the cognition and all the other aspects of psychology, emotions seems to be the last, but the most important, I think, in our life, because we feel ourselves through life. We don't think ourselves through life. We think we're thinking, but we're feeling it. Everything's about a feeling. And I often say that we're not afraid of what things are going to happen to us. Like some terrible thing's going to happen. We break up with someone, or we lose our job. It's not that thing itself, but how it makes us feel. And then how it makes us feel is just a felt sense in the body. It's the brain processing, moving hormones around and stimulating certain feelers in the body. And we're just so afraid of being in our body and feeling. Yeah. And so anyway, I just find that it's fascinating that it's taken so long to start thinking about how powerful emotions are in our brain processing and also in our life. Yeah,
it's incredible. If you think about communication, it's more than language, and a lot of it is expressed emotionally. This goes back to Darwin. So Darwin, when he was studying monkeys and apes, he noticed that they were using facial and body language to communicate. So he started to wonder, do human beings do this? And of course, he got in big trouble with the Christian orthodoxy at that time.
Oh yeah, he was controversial.
Yeah,
even now there's still some people who don't believe in evolution.
We're still debating his work.
Yeah,
but we know evolution is a powerful fact in biology. I mean, there's no way to deny it. We can see the evidence very clearly, and and emotion then, it's more than people think of just these negative and positive or
toxic emotions.
Yeah, it's much more than that. It's really the way we experience and give meaning to the world.
Yeah, it is. If you don't have emotions, you want to get rid of all the negative and only be positive. What a pressure it is on your life to kind of putting a bubble around yourself. I can't feel negative, or I can't have a bad day, or I can't have a down day. Just or someone can't be angry. Like we all have to be this happy, pappy person all the time. It's what happens is in psychology is that you suppress the emotion. It doesn't go anywhere. It's there, and then it'll burst out. It's that kick the dog syndrome they talk about. I hate that term, but it's like you go to work and you're getting into traffic, and then you're just kind of tolerating, and then you get home, and the person that's there gets the brunt of your, even if they didn't do anything, like they yapped a little dog or something. But it is really something that we have to find beyond just like understanding intellectually emotions, but understanding how we can live with them. Not just, I can put this in this bucket and this feeling, and I can reframe the feeling. It's more like, how do we allow ourselves to feel more?
Yes, that's a good way to put it. There's a few myths that we want to dispel. First of all, there are no toxic emotions. Now, can emotions become toxic? Well, yeah, of course. Anything can become toxic if you...
Positivity can be toxic too. Exactly. Toxic positivity.
Yeah, but emotions themselves, they're not toxic because they evolved to help us make sense of the world and to adapt to the world, right? So fear, anger, shame, not toxic. They're simply useful to us, and therefore we kept them. Our brain, if they were not useful to us, we would have gotten rid of them a long time ago.
And if we think about it from a biological standpoint, like through the brain, it starts to give us a little more sense of what the emotion is versus giving it some other meaning that's supernatural or something that is like bad or wrong or some negative energy or something. It's more understanding that this is like a part of our being in our biology.
Yeah, so here's a simple diagram that you can kind of visualize in your head to start to think about your emotions as a way to master them, or at least to move towards mastery of the emotion, right? So we start at the top, right? Let's say a vertical line with pleasant emotions that feel good to us,
that we want to have more of.
Yeah, we want to cultivate more of. At the bottom of that vertical line is unpleasant emotions, right?
Like stress, anxiety, anger.
Things that don't feel good to us. They don't feel good to our body.
Although it's interesting, they did research and they said the pleasure centers in the brain light up when you're angry. And it's because it gives you that to fight the beat. Yeah, and you get this kind of like release from it. And so people can be addicted to anger. And so there's no like pleasant or unpleasant in a way. It really is subjective. Right?
Very much so. And also that we rarely feel one emotion on its own.
Yeah, like, I'm feeling angry. It's always like a bunch of, I'm feeling angry, but also confused. I'm feeling anxious and angry. I'm feeling sad and angry.
That's right.
I'm feeling happy and angry. Yeah.
The other one, and this is more, it might require a little bit more explanation, that people think emotions can damage them, can be hurtful to them. And of course, chronic anger, for example, or chronic any kind of stress can damage your physical heart and lungs and your body in general, right? Because it's so intense. But in general, if we feel a strong emotion, it will not damage our true self, our awareness, right? So anyway, we have this horizontal line with the pleasant emotions on top, the unpleasant emotions at the bottom. Now we draw a horizontal line with, on the left, low arousal, and on the right, high arousal. So you have pleasant, unpleasant, low arousal, high arousal. So now you can say, okay, this gives us 4 quadrants. On the upper left-hand side, you have pleasant and low arousal. That's when you're relaxed. That's when you're calm.
It's like a peaceful state.
Yeah, you're content. After you
You're not
work
like
out,
motivated. Yeah, you're just kind of just
relaxed.
sitting on your deck watching the sunset. Yeah.
Yes, after you work out, after you do yoga, after you have a great meal, talk with a friend, you have those pleasant experiences, right? You're relaxed, calm, and content. This is a powerful state, of course, because we know from research this state of emotion, state of mind, it's a state of mind really, has regenerative powers. It brings all your system into alignment. The happier you are, the calmer, the more relaxed you can be at some point in the day, the healthier and happier you will be.
And then counter to that, a low arousal that's not pleasant is boredom. You're just bored, and you feel like you don't have energy, you feel sluggish, you feel even sad, and it's kind of like, it's not a hyper feeling, it's just kind of like a depression can lead into that, or like just down feelings. Those are that kind of quadrant.
Right. And now if we ask, okay, what would be the function of these unpleasant low arousal emotions?
Maybe just kind of be present to something's missing in your life. It's not a bad thing. It's like, okay, I'm bored. Something's missing. And it's many times it's that drive, like even sluggishness. It's like, maybe I'm not eating the right foods, or I'm sad. Like, where am I putting my happiness externally? Like anything can be used as an opportunity to understand yourself and not just push it away. And I need to be happy. And a lot of people do that. They can't be sad because it's, they're not a sad person, so they kind of push it away instead of going, I do feel this kind of boredom. And maybe it's not acceptable to think I have all this great success in my life, but I'm bored. I have this, great job and I have a great family, but I'm bored. It feels like socially unacceptable. So we kind of keep it. But to know that, I'm kind of feeling that, that's a good sign to ask yourself some bigger question.
That's right. Then on the upper right-hand side, we have pleasant emotions mixed with high arousal. So this is the good stuff, right?
This is riding the roller coaster, your wedding day, the birth of your child, these big, high, winning an award or succeeding, speaking like on stage or attending something that's really exciting to you and motivating to you, and you're very aroused. Even like watching a movie that's very inspirational.
Yeah.
Or a comedy, like you're like, this is so funny. Yeah.
So this is when you're happy, enthusiastic, and excited. Now, if it goes to the extreme, of course, the high arousal is stressful to people. So even happiness can be stressful.
Because they're afraid that, what if it doesn't last? Yeah, like it's almost like a trepidation to that arousal. And then on the bottom is high arousal, but then the unpleasant, which is like we talked about anger. It's like, think of it as high energy, but in a like, it doesn't feel pleasant. Anxious or fear, when we face a bear or we almost get into an accident or we're, something, you're public speaking, confronting a relationship and having to, have this like a confrontation, all that is high arousal, but also unpleasant to a lot of people. But again, it's an opportunity. It's an opportunity because if it feels unpleasant, we have to ask ourselves why, and what is out of alignment with ourselves that's creating this unpleasant feeling. It's like a flag, like a red light going, hey, there's something here that doesn't feel in alignment. What is going on? Like where is this anger coming from? And it's always an opportunity. Always an opportunity to ask bigger questions versus let's get rid of the anger or suppress it. Let's get rid of the fear. Let's clear the fear away. Or just, I'm anxious, so I'm just going to run it out and go for a run. That's great for short term, but ask yourself, why am I needing to run all the time from my anxiety? And those are the questions you need to ask.
Yeah, the research indicates that even acknowledging and naming an emotion like anger, anxiety, or fear gives you a calming effect. In other words, you're more in control because you're acknowledging, you're naming it, you're saying, I'm in this state. It's unpleasant, but what do I need to do in order to change it, or what do I need to do to face the situation?
Well, I think I would go even further. That naming it is the first step. But I think what really, for me personally, and for our clients and our coaches, what gives me that deeper sense of dealing with that emotion is not naming it, but finding out why I feel this way, and what is the misperception of myself and the world that is causing this anxiety. And when I'm able to identify, I'm anxious because what's your worst fear? Yeah. I'm afraid this is going to happen. And it's so ridiculous. You're bringing it to light, and you're kind of I guess bringing language to it, but deeper than just labeling it. You want to go beyond just labeling it, because labeling it, that does give you, or reframing it, it's an opportunity, but you want to get to, why is this here? What's the deeper core reason why this anxiety is sitting there? And when you uncover that, then you're free.
Absolutely. Yeah, definitely. You don't want to stop at labeling, and you want to learn how to work with emotions. And again, to see them as the building blocks of the meaning of your life. Because how do we create meaning? How do we generate that meaningful life? It's through emotions, right? Through passion, through the meaning we ascribe to our work. The experiences that we have in life.
Well, with every growth opportunity I've ever had, it was triggered by an unpleasant emotion. The unpleasant emotion is what is the catalyst for my transformation. So we want to look at it as Carl Jung would say, something has come alive in me that needs my attention. It's just this aliveness in us, and to be more intimate with these emotional centers, which are conditioned from early in life. We have these kind of set responses and reactions that we have learned over years and years and years of being in this body, that we want to question them. And so we want to break from that hard wiring and start to not rewire, but shift our brain so it can shift. And that's possible. We don't have to. Yeah. Also I want to talk about that, the anger, because there was research early in the 70s and 60s. There was this kind of idea that you beat the pillow or you scream, those screaming kind of therapies that, then they found primal screaming. Yeah. And they found out that actually it wasn't getting rid of the anger, but it was actually reinforcing that part of the brain rewiring itself. And so if you're doing that, still pounding pillows, or even running with anger or channeling that anger into something, you're reteaching your brain that, anger is just this is what I do with it. And so we want to find a different way to approach it that's not kind of reinforcing it.
That's right. For parents, the last time we talked about social psychology, one of the main ideas was that we learn from observing others. We don't have to experience it ourselves. So when children observe their parents using physical punishment, right, to discipline, what you're teaching those kids is that physical aggression is okay, right?
That's how you deal with problems, right? Conflicts.
Yeah, that's right. The things that they observe, they're absorbing. They're saying that's okay. That's part of being a family. That's part of bonding and all this stuff.
Well, even a parent hurting another parent, even if they're not hitting the children, the child is learning violence is okay.
Yes, and we know this is a hard kind of walk to walk, because life is so stressful. Family situations are difficult. And, you can't always control your emotions, but you have to be, the more aware you are of them, the more conscious you are, of course, the more enlightened you will be as a parent.
Yeah. So just to review, the brain has many different centers. It goes throughout our body with its nervous system that is every part of our body is a thinking, feeling center. And we want to learn about ourselves and how we're responding to life so we can change. And it all starts from in here, because really out there, is only an interpretation, where it's an inner interpretation, what we're seeing out in the world. And so we have the control, we have the power to shift that interpretation, to shift our energy in our body, to shift our emotional state at any time in any situation. But we're trained that we have to make these circumstances out there change, so then I could be happy, or I could feel safe, or then I could feel empowered. But we really have to start on the inside, as we always talk about. So, okay, well, we are going to be continuing our series on the great minds of psychology. Don't forget to join us next week. In the meantime, please subscribe to our channel here. Don't forget to do that on the YouTube channel. And if you're listening to us on Spotify, iTunes, or any of the podcast hosting services, please don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss an episode of this fantastic mind-expanding series. So thank you again, everyone, for joining us, and we will see you soon.